The Primrose Project builds on a bottom-up, clinician-initiated family of clinical trials, which have been successful in raising inclusion rates to offer additional lines of treatment. I'm Duane Schulthess, and on this Vital Health podcast, I'm speaking to two Primrose Project members. Hans Gelderblom, chair of the Department of Medical Oncology at Leiden University Medical Center. Hi, Hans. How you doing?
Good, thank you. And
Sahar Barjesteh van Waalwijk van Doorn-Khosrovani.
Yes.
Did I got it?
Yes, you did.
Thank you. A member of the Dutch National Payers Evaluation Committee for Specialized Medicines and Companion Diagnostics. Sahar, thank you very much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So Primrose is structured around a drug rediscovery protocol, or DRUP trial. What is a DRUP trial? What do we mean by rediscovery?
The background of the DRUP trial is a personal one for me, because I'm a medical oncologist and I'm seeing patients in my clinic. And I think about 12 to 15 years ago, the genomic testing started to come out. And enthusiastic molecular biologists told the audience, so you should know your molecular profile, your driver mutation, and then go to your oncologist and he will give you the drugs that you need. But we couldn't prescribe that. So we thought, how can we have a solution for this problem? And of course, the healthcare system is different in each country, but this was 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the drug rediscovery protocol was a solution. We developed that to engage pharma industry to give their molecular targeted drug to us, so we could give that to the patients that had a driver mutation in their tumor. So it was a match, and we thought about that we are only in a small country in the Netherlands, so we thought about sharing these protocols with other countries. So that's how Primrose came into place, where the Scandinavians were the first to adopt that, and now we're working at spreading it out more, so we can have results quicker. And again, in the patient room, we can help individual patients.
So Sahar, from an evaluator's standpoint, what is it from your perspective that you find interesting about the drug rediscovery protocol and trial?
So the trial is actually a platform that provides access to patients. The thing is that we as health insurance companies, we have a duty of care towards our policyholders, but we just can't reimburse any drug. So there has to be some evidence, and this platform helps us to build evidence and provide access at the same time. So this is the reason that I got involved in the trial, and also the third stage of DRUP is also developed by. It's actually a co-creation with health insurance companies to see what level of evidence is needed to eventually reimburse these drugs.
So one of the things that makes the DRUP trial different is the rediscovery part. You're using pre-approved drugs. These are drugs that are already on the market, have a known safety profile. Yeah. Can you define what is an on-label use versus an off-label use? Because often you're not using these drugs for the original targets. So how does that differentiate between on and off-label?
Well, a drug is registered for a certain indication. And when you talk about expensive drugs, we are not allowed, in many countries, we're not allowed just to prescribe it for any other patient outside of the label. So for me, that as a physician, it's quite clear what I can do and what I cannot do. But maybe Sahar can add to that.
Yeah, the companies often register drugs for tumor types in which these mutations are most frequent. So you can't just expect a company to authorize this drug to do the clinical trials in every single tumor type. Of course, we have the tumor agnostic indications, which are very helpful, but most other drugs are just registered for a certain indication. And within Primrose, within the DRUP trial, we explore the effectiveness, the efficacy, and the safety of these drugs in other tumor types. And sometimes they're working, and sometimes they're not.
Right. So again, but it allows you more flexibility to look at the more effectiveness side, I assume.
Exactly.
I think from an oncologist perspective, how do you balance this need to try and experiment versus, playing within the lines, painting by numbers? How do you manage that tension between on and off-label use?
Well, in the Netherlands, we're quite strict because if I prescribe any expensive medication, I have to mark in my electronic patient record for which indication I prescribe the drug. If I would lie.
Of course you wouldn't, Hans. We know that. Particularly with a payer right here.
Then the authorities, they might visit your hospital and
Sahar is going to come over and start
checking on Hans.
And they say, well, pay us 2 million euros. So we're afraid of that. So we don't do that.
So Sahar, from the benefits of the program, obviously the focus on off-label comes with certain benefits, I would think. Knowing the safety profile, for example. What else? What are the other good things about using a novel approach to a known drug?
It's the affordability, because eventually these are more affordable drugs. These are drugs somewhere lose their patents and exclusivities and would be available for a much better price than those drugs that are new to the market. So in this way, you help developing drugs for these rare tumor types, and these are affordable options for the health system. But at the same time, as we are developing evidence, we are also reimbursing some of these cohorts. So in the third stage of DROP, we have made an exception, as this is a platform for access, to have a personalized reimbursement scheme, meaning that the first part of the therapy is with trial medication, but once the patient has shown clinical benefit, which is seen as stable disease or any kind of response, then the patient can transition from the trial medication to commercial packages, which is quite unique. I mean, we haven't seen anything like this. So after 4 months, you can move from trial medication to commercial packages.
And we've talked about this mentality that off-label is verboten. I mean, you're not supposed to do it. It's a big shift to get the payers and the regulators to say, okay, we're willing to run a clinical trial off-label. How is your experience within the context of Primrose to sort of pry that ability open? I think that's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
It's certainly a big deal. And we do that. Off-label is not always wrong. I mean, with less expensive medication, for instance, with chemotherapy, the FOLFIRINOX, which is a common drug, there are big phase 3 trials showing efficacy, but it's just not within label. So in the Netherlands, we have, and in many other countries, we have a system where we say, okay, this is off-label, but it is reasonable. There's good data behind it. Can we get this reimbursed? And then if all the physicians, the independent body in the physicians group of oncologists says, okay, that's a good idea, then it goes to the Club of Sahar, and they usually say yes. So that's for the not expensive medication.
So Sahar, from the standpoint of your colleagues, was this a heavy lift, or were they willing to go along with this idea that we're going to be basically putting in a protocol using off-label use to determine efficacy and effectiveness? Did you get any pushback? Let
me first tell you, we just looked at off-label use in the Netherlands in oncology. So one of our PhD students, Hans, and also Atze, looked at it. They found out that about 30% of the payment codes that are used in oncology are off-label indications in the Netherlands. And many of these indications are actually, they have robust evidence, sometimes even much more evidence than some authorized indication. And some of them are like for rare cancers where there's no other treatment options.
Sure.
Think about pediatric oncology.
Of course.
Most of treatments are off-label. So off-label use is quite common, but I'm I'm talking about well-established off-label use. But my colleagues have been quite supportive with the DROP trial, and also we are also looking to have a similar platform for other type of diseases with no other treatment options. And I tell you why, Duane, because if we do not have such platform in our country, then there would be two options perhaps. Either doctors find a mutation and they prescribe off-label in an unregulated, uncontrolled way, which is also not reimbursable actually. Or we would receive prior authorization requests, and every health insurance companies deal with the situation differently.
Right.
And every company has its own policy, a way of assessing things. And then you'll have inequality in access. Which is something that we don't want in a health system, which is based on solidarity and public health funding. So that's the reason that we all work together to find a solution to provide access, but to provide access responsibly, with ensuring fairness for both to our patients and to our policyholders. Who are young students who are paying the premiums.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't waste money on treatments that do not work. But that's why we came up with this scheme of personalized reimbursement. We say, show that it works, that the patient is benefiting from drug, and from that moment we are taking over reimbursement. It's not a pay for performance, because otherwise you have to also reimburse the first part, but the first part is considered as testing phase for us. And it's also covered by trial medication. And then once the patient is benefiting, I mean, everybody would want the patient to have access to that drug, right?
I would also think that, given the fact that you've just said that close to a third of all prescriptions of oncology products are off-label,
yes,
there's not currently a procedure to manage the collection and measurement and really check this out and learn from it. Yeah. It seems like this is a great opportunity to put into clinical practice some things that before would be slipping through the cracks.
Well, actually, the TAPER trial in the US was developed at the same time as the DROP trial. We talked to each other and we said, okay, we're doing the scans at 8 and 16 weeks. Would you do that too? Because maybe in the future we can share data. And of course, in the US, the situation is different, because if a physician thinks it's a good option for the patient and the patient is well insured, they can just prescribe the drug. And there the data were lost. So they had another incentive. So like you say, a lot of data were not available and patients were getting these drugs. In the Netherlands, it was the other way around. We needed the protocol for the patients to have access to these expensive targeted drugs.
So you mentioned the reimbursement, Sahar. How is that working right now? So obviously you're putting the clinical trial together. It's registered. It's approved. This is a European project. Even though they're off-label,
yes,
and even though they're also often generic or biosimilar, there's still a cost there.
Yes.
They're not free. Are they being reimbursed?
So in the context of the trial, we had one cohort that was getting the reimbursement in a personalized reimbursement scheme, and eventually the cohort was evaluated by our HTA body, and now it's now fully reimbursed, the indication, providing access to many patients. But there are some other cohorts that need to get started. And in every country, we are dealing with access. So hopefully by discussing this issue with other countries, we should find a solution. Because as long as we work together in this platform, the contribution of every country in terms of investment of every health system would be quite limited, right? Every country delivers a few patients, and then soon you have a cohort to decide whether the drug is working or not. It's a huge benefit to work with other countries, and I guess health system would eventually see that it's in their benefit to have this pathway, to have this structured way of gathering data, analyzing data, because otherwise these treatments would be reimbursed in some countries in an off-label manner, either through the hospital budgets, or sometimes companies provide access as compassionate use. Yeah. But it's such a shame that these data are not collected, right? Because eventually we wouldn't know that these drugs are safe and effective. everything would be based on personal, individual doctors' experience and not based on real evidence. So the best thing for every country, every health system, is to have this structure way of providing access and gathering data and to know whether the drugs are really working or not.
Are your other colleagues, your other payers in other countries, are they as progressively open-minded, shall we say, as you, Sahar, who are willing to see about reimbursement? I mean, has there been any pushback from some of the other payer countries?
Yes. I mean, Norway has adopted our system. So in Norway, you have the same way of personalized reimbursement within DROP trial. There are some countries in Europe who are not allowed to reimburse anything, any medication in a clinical trial. For instance, Germany is not allowed to use to reimburse medicine within a clinical trial. In the Netherlands, we have a different situation. For instance, many clinical trials on dose optimization or de-escalation studies, they all get their drugs reimbursed. And for platform trials such as DROP trials, so platforms that provide access, we have made an exception actually to have this model of reimbursement and helping these platforms exist, because it's in our benefit that this off-label use is put into a structure with data collection and as I said, the way we reimburse also reduce the risk of paying for treatments that do not work.
Yeah, precisely. I would think that this would collect evidence and then you'd have a better effectiveness package that says, hey, wait a minute, this makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. So Hans,
please.
To
it's very important, and that's not always stressed, but you mentioned it shortly, working yes or no, but just some examples. So
please.
So if you keep prescribing CDK4/6 inhibitors to patients with that profile, and we have shown that is not effective. So it can save a lot of money if every physician or every institute thinks, okay, that might be a good idea, but somewhere else there was a vast amount of patients that have no benefit, then you should also stop doing that.
Yeah, and toxicity as well.
Also, but when you have no benefit, then it's also clear. These drugs are registered drugs, so you know the toxicity profile in general. So we're not often surprised by that, but it's, the efficacy is also, of course, a balance of quality of life and efficacy. We work with registered drugs because these trials are called protocol and not study.
Right.
And we have thought about that because we want to make it as light as possible on the regulation side. Of course, we comply with all the regulations, but it's drugs that we know the toxicity profile of. So. And that way we can also do it in the whole country, and hopefully in whole Europe.
How are your other fellow oncologists in other countries and other markets? And we discussed Germany. One of the challenges, for example, adaptive licensing. The European Medicine Agency project was not able to do anything in Germany because of this regulatory stricture that's there, that you can't really do a lot of innovation. What are the other oncologists thinking about DROP? I mean, across the EU, are they engaging, or do you see this expanding? What's been the feedback among your colleagues?
Oh yeah, so we started with this project PCM for EU, and we purposely had some middle-income countries in Europe on board, and you see that they are starting DROP trials as well. Of course, there are some examples of initiatives in other countries, like the Rome trial, where they do a randomized study. So there are some different initiatives, but the value of having the same protocol with the same CT scan time points and eligibility criteria, it helps you to collect the data all together and reach your answers quicker. It saves time, saves money, and it's good for everyone.
So let's say you do find a novel new indication within the context of the DROP trial, and you say, okay, this should be an expanded label. Now, obviously, you have certain ability within the Netherlands system to do that, but you also then need to try and take it to the EMA. What are the procedures there to actually try and get a label expansion? What are the steps? How is that going to work? Sahar,
the most.
We're going to you, Sahar.
we have been actually a few times to EMA, and EMA is involved in this trial because we would like to ensure that the data created within the platform also complies with requirements of EMA. But I guess we need the new pharmaceutical legislation that helps us with repurposing, because there is currently no pathway. Duane, you've done a study on that the public investment in academic trial hasn't resulted much in.
Yes,
right?
we have. Yes, that's correct. Yes, we did do that.
So it's true. So the public investment in academic trials hasn't resulted in
not been a winning formula necessarily.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
But this public investment was not mostly directed to expanding indications, right? Not really developing new drugs, but mostly expanding the indications, like having different combinations, using the drug in a different setting, in different patient population. But this hasn't been very successful either. I mean, there are very good trials, but they do not reach patients. The results are not implemented. And that's because we do not have a pathway to have these indications, these learnings from these trials to the regulatory agency. So we need this pathway.
And there's a tension there too, because you want a certain amount of local ability and control and flexibility, but we're not happy with the sort of catch-as-catch-can randomized approach to regulatory pathway we see across Europe. So now we're also trying to centralize more around EMA, which also happens to be here in the Netherlands, by the way, now.
Yeah.
So just as luck would have it. So it's not a huge trip for you guys to talk to him. There is this tension there. Is there a willingness from EMA and the Commission to try and accommodate something like this that can still be bottom-up in the context of the new regulation? I mean, Hans, you're shaking yes?
Yeah. So the EMA is a partner in Primrose. Partner in crime, that's good.
Allegedly.
No, but they're open to novel ways. They see what happens in the field, and I think they have very good people that already think about that and are willing to communicate with us to find good solutions. Okay, there are regulations, we cannot go around that, but I feel a lot of positive feelings about how they communicate with us. Of course, I'm a bit hesitant because, as you can hear, because we cannot bend the rules.
No, of course not.
But we can cooperate. So for instance, they thought about these single-arm trials. What do you need with regard to quality of life? Which questionnaires? Which would convince them? And we have the ESMO, the European Society of Medical Oncology rules, for single-arm trials, and that's helping us already. But they're not the regulators.
Yeah. Single-arm trials are tough. Generally, they work in orphan drugs, as we know, because sometimes you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
But you always like a control arm. You're developing some virtual trial arms, which is great. I mean, we've done a lot of that work ourselves. The question is getting a new indication approved. Someone's got to pay for that. Have the companies been open to try and expand labels and get secondary indications and try and take that up? What is the feedback you've had from the companies? I'll start with you, Sahar. What do you think?
So currently there is actually hardly any incentive for companies to work with us. Because these are also very small indications, so there are not huge. There is not huge benefit in terms of revenue for the companies. But with the new pharmaceutical legislation, as I understood, every repurposing will lead to 4 years of data exclusivity.
Right.
And that would be probably the incentive for pharmaceutical companies, and I'm also talking about the generic and biosimilar companies to work with us to get this label extension. I'm quite sure that European Commission is quite supportive of this, because they would like to provide affordable medicine for people in Europe. Therefore, we need to establish this pathway of repurposing and maximize potential of compounds that we already have. And this is the only way to have this pathway.
What about organizations like ASH or ESMO, some of the oncology organizations? What's been their approach to trying to get this incorporated into clinical practice? Have they been very acceptive about DRUP, or what's been their feeling?
I'm not sure whether they have a real opinion on that. They've been working on, and that's been very helpful with the single-arm ESMO MCBS criteria.
Sure.
I think every pharmaceutical company should dream these criteria, because if you want to get drugs on the market in Europe, you should design your trial according to the MCBS scale. Well, we're not happy that some of the trials go to other areas in the world right now. Maybe they're a bit afraid of us. But on the other hand, while listening to you, I think pharma companies should be lining up to get their drugs into DRUP, because it's quite an easy way for reimbursement, whether it's on label or not. But if it's reimbursed, then you sell it, right?
Yeah.
Money is money.
Well, last time I checked, yes.
Right.
So what are the next steps for the project, Sahar, from the regulatory side? What do you see you trying to do within your organization? What are the next steps?
The next step is to see how we can collaborate with other countries in terms of assessment of these cohorts, providing reimbursement, but also to discuss things with different companies, because we need as many different compounds within this platform as possible. Because once you do whole genome sequencing, then you would like to be able to match these patients to different drugs. So collaborating with pharmaceutical companies, I mean, we already are collaborating, but we need to better understand what are their incentives, how can we make them interested in this platform. With this pathway towards registration, towards authorization, to have this second label, because it's good to have this reimbursement in some countries. Some other countries would be quite hesitant to reimburse off-label indications, not only because of the cost, but also because of the liability. But having a label extension would help all countries. A very recent authorized indication of EMA has been based on 24 patients.
Yeah.
This shows that probably the data that we will be delivering to the agency would also be taken seriously.
Well, we did a comparative effectiveness study on CAR-T where we had 36 patients in one arm. That got published and was used for regulatory decision-making. So you can do it with good evidence. It's not easy, but you just have to cross your bases and dot your I's and cross your T's. So you can do it.
Yes, kind of conditional
Sure.
approval, and then we'll get additional information in a larger cohort once the drug is reimbursed, and you would be able to have larger cohorts to gather data in real-world setting.
So Hans, from the practitioner side, what do you see happening? How can other practitioners get involved in the project? What should they do?
Well, they should go to their leading institutes in their country and say, okay, listen, are you already engaged in the DRUP-like trials? The idea of Primrose, we want to have a one-stop shop. So you go to Primrose with your drug, and you can do it in as many countries as possible. So even in smaller countries with a smaller population, patients have access to these targeted drugs. You have a quick answer. And with the data sharing protocol, not only for clinical data, but also for molecular data, because you want to know precisely who you are treating. And if it's not working based on molecular data, you better understand who not to give these drugs. So this is something that, for me, is really the next step and the solution.
And how could they practically get in contact with you? Through the Primrose website?
Yeah.
prime-rose.eu, that correct?
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Hans, Sahar, thank you very
Duane,
much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
All right.
The executive producer of the Vital Health podcast is Duane Schulthess. Our editor is Mark Brodeen. Our project manager is Gwen O'Laughlin. The Vital Health podcast is a production of Vital Transformation LLC, copyright 2024.